Alright you guys, back with another tutorial where we make super technical stuff super simple. Today we're going to be jumping into basic photo editing in Lightroom. This will not be a super technical deep dive. I'm literally going to be going through each section, each slider, and just explaining how it functions and what it actually does to your image. So let's talk about it. When you get into the basics of editing a photo, the first step really is to color correct the photo so that the colors appear as they did in person. This involves adjusting white balance, exposure, contrast, and other very basic settings. Once you've done the color correction stage, you can move to step 2, which is like the color grading stage, where you can edit all of your colors, adjust the style of the photo, and give the photo a unique look using the curves, presets, effects, and other things. So let's just jump into Lightroom and start going over some of these basics. Here you'll see I have 4 different photos from my recent trip to DC. This photo was shot on my Fujifilm X100VI, so this is going to be an example of a JPEG. This was not in RAW format, this is already in JPEG coming out of the camera with a film simulation already kind of baked into the photo. And then these other 3 photos were shot with my Sony a7C II in RAW. So in a bit, I'm going to give a comparison of the differences between shooting in JPEG and shooting in RAW. But let's just start at the top of the software and let's just take a second to go through and understand what each of these settings actually do. And I'm going to start off by showing you a huge hint to be able to master these settings more efficiently. Let's go over and just hover over the name of this one, and this will give you what it actually does. So exposure controls the brightness of your photo. Move left to make the photo darker, move right to make the photo brighter. And you can see it's even giving you a little example. It will do that for each of these settings. So that's basically how I'm going to explain these, but I'm also going to demonstrate on this photo that I have here. The exposure slider adjusts the overall exposure of your image in one go. Okay, so we can either make the photo brighter or we can make the photo darker as a whole. This is going to affect the entire image. Now, your contrast slider is going to determine the contrast, or like the difference between light and dark colors. So let's just see this example. If I increase the contrast, you can tell that there is a huge difference between the very bright parts and the very dark parts. But if I decrease it, you can see that there's almost not as much of a difference to tell what's really dark and what's really light. It also makes the image look flatter. So higher contrast kind of makes it look more defined, more rich, and lower contrast also kind of makes it look flatter with not as much depth to it. And one thing to note with the Lightroom contrast slider is that it will affect the saturation of your colors a little. So increasing the contrast will also increase the saturation just a little. So you want to be careful using the contrast slider, like in extreme cases. Next up is the highlight slider. This controls the brightness of the lighter parts of your photo. So you can see here, as we increase the highlights, the brightest parts of the image get brighter. And if we decrease the highlights, only the bright parts of the image gets darker. So with contrast, we're affecting both. But with highlights, we're just affecting the bright parts. And then as we move to shadows, same thing, but for the darker parts of your image. So if we pull the shadows all the way down, it's going to darken those dark areas of the photo. But if we lift the shadows, it's going to brighten the dark parts of the photo. Now we get to whites and blacks, and this is all part of the light tab at the top of Lightroom. So basically with whites and blacks, it's how white or how black the whites and blacks of your image look. So let me demonstrate this. If you increase your whites, it's going to make it look more completely white. But if you decrease your whites, it will almost make it more of a muted white. Same thing goes for your blacks. If we deepen our blacks, they become like true dark black. But if we increase the blacks, it almost becomes like a faded black. So we've learned what all of the sliders do in this light section of Lightroom. You can use this little eye icon right here to see a before and after of just these settings. Now, also included in the light section, you'll see the curves. The curves tool works in a similar way to the sliders at the top, but it gives you more control over the tonal range and contrast of your photo. So you'll see on the curves that there are different pages. And this first one here is the point curve. This is where you can create more specific contrast than you might could achieve with your sliders. But again, all of these settings work together in combination to create the photo, and there are a lot of different ways to get to the same result. A really common practice for the curves tool is to create an S-curve. So you can go and select different points. We'll start off with 3 different points. and I'm just going to make a slight S shape where we drop this just a little, and we increase the highlights just a little. And then you can see here, that just creates more contrast in the photo because up here are your highlights. This is your midtones, and this is your shadows. Then you could do the same thing to adjust your tones. So you could come into the red and cyan, and you could create a little bit of an S-curve. Same with your greens. And your blue. So you can see that that drastically affected the photo and added in different tones to the shadows or the midtones. You can make your shadows more warm, or you can make your highlights more blue, or whatever you want to do. Curves is really where a lot of the changes comes in when you're making presets or you're using presets. A lot of the customization occurs in that curve section because you can be so specific. So that completes the whole light section of Lightroom. Now let's move on to the color settings, starting with this little section right here where you can adjust temp, tint, vibrance, and saturation. Temperature is basically going to affect the white balance of your photo. I shot this photo in RAW, so that means that you can have a lot more control over your white balance. You'll see that I can actually adjust the Kelvin very specifically to achieve whatever white balance that I want in post, no matter what you shot it at. So we can make the photo really warm, or we can make the photo really cool. So that's your temperature setting. Next we have tint. This is going to adjust the magenta or green tint of your photo. So you could make it more magenta, or you could make it more green. You can do this to make sure you correct your photo for like fluorescent lighting or whatever lighting might have cast a certain tint. You can correct the green or magenta shift using this slider. So we just want to make sure that our whites kind of look white. And there we go. Next up we have vibrance and saturation. Vibrance changes the saturation without causing unpleasant color casts. Saturation, on the other hand, controls the saturation of all the colors equally. So vibrance is going to try to make your prominent colors kind of pop without affecting the saturation of all of the colors. So let's just see what this does in this instance. If we pull vibrance all the way up, you can see it's really making that yellow pop. Or we could take it all the way down and it desaturates it, but it doesn't desaturate the photo all the way because we're not affecting all of the colors. So we could bring that back in. Now let's see what saturation does. If we pull saturation up, it saturates all of the colors in the photo. Or we could desaturate all of the colors in the photo until it's black and white. So that's the difference between vibrance and saturation. Now let's move down to the color mixer. And honestly, this is one of my favorite Lightroom settings and where I have the most fun because you can go in and adjust the colors individually. So let's just go through. We're gonna select red. You can adjust hue, saturation, and luminance. Hue is just the actual color. Saturation is the saturation of that specific color, and luminance is the brightness or darkness of that color. So we can come into red. We can increase the red. There's not really a lot of red in this photo. You can see some of the people's shirts at the bottom. We could desaturate that if we wanted to. We could make it brighter so that they're really popping down there, or darker, or we could change that red to be orange or pink. Now let's come into orange, and because there's a lot of orange in this photo, you're really going to be able to see what the color mixer can actually do. We can saturate that orange more, or we can desaturate it completely. We can make it a little bit darker, so it's just affecting that one color. We're just darkening orange, or we could brighten it. Then up here we could change the hue. We could make it more pink, leaning towards red if we wanted to. Or we could make it lean towards yellow and green. So this is where you can really come in and really play with your colors, you can make it look however you want to, just based off of the color mixer. You can do so much. As you scroll down, you can see that there are also some other color adjustment tools like point color, where you can select an individual color in your photo and make fine-tuned adjustments to it. There's also color grading, which allows you to stylize your photo by adding color tints to the shadows, midtones, and highlights. I don't use color grading a whole lot, but again, there are a lot of tools inside of Lightroom that let you get to the same result, but just in a different way. I love using the color mixer. You might like using the color grading tool. They all do slightly different things, but you can still achieve an awesome image just depending on whichever tools you want to use. And again, since this is basics, I'm not going to go in depth into some of these tools. I'm just wanting to give an overall explanation of the software and what all it can do. So let's keep going. Once you're past the color section, you'll come to the effects section. This is where you can adjust texture, which is basically just enhance or reduce the appearance of texture in your photo. You can adjust clarity. This is basically the contrast around the edges of objects in your photo. There's dehaze. If you had kind of a hazy scene, you can dehaze it, or you can kind of add a hazy look. And then there's vignette, where you can add those darkened or brightened corners. And you can also add grain to your photo to add that film look. So let's just go through these very quickly. You can see we could crank the texture all the way up. That just really makes every texture in the photo pop more. Or we can take that texture away and it almost makes it look brushed or like really soft. I like to increase the texture and decrease the clarity just a little bit. So let's see what clarity does first. Clarity, again, sharpens the edges of objects. So it really makes things look more defined. Or you can soften the edges. So it almost gives it like that glow, again, almost like a brushed look. So what I like to do is decrease that clarity a little bit, but increase the texture. Then dehaze is exactly what it sounds like. You can make the photo look hazy, or you can dehaze it, bring back some of that rich color if you had like a really cloudy day, or it just kind of looked hazy and you lost a lot of that rich depth that was in the photo before. You can always use dehaze to bring some of that back. And again, vignette darkens those corners, or you can brighten the corners if you need to. So that's the effects panel. Now let's move down to the detail panel. This is where you can denoise an image if it had noise in it. If you use this one, it will do it automatically with all of the new AI that's in there. I like to use the manual noise reduction just because I'm used to it. So we can just zoom in on this area over here that has some noise in it. And if you increase that luminance, and if you want to increase a little bit of the color, you can see, boom, that noise is gone. So if you have a photo that's noisy, you can always do noise reduction. But just be careful that noise reduction does soften your image. So you never want to use too much of it unless you're really trying to recover a really dark photo that was overexposed, or it was too dark, it was underexposed, and you had noise in the corners or noise in the dark areas, whatever the case may be. You just want to be careful not to use too much noise reduction. Then we can move down to optics. So this is where you could select to enable lens corrections. If Lightroom has your lens programmed in, which I was using a really unique lens for this photo, most of the time it has this in there automatically. So you can just select that and it will just make small adjustments based on your lens, because lenses have, some of them have vignetting, some of them have a little bit of warping on the edges if it's a wider angle lens. So for example, if I use my 24-70, I can enable this and it will just give a little bit of correction automatically, because the lens manufacturers upload the correction profiles to Lightroom automatically. So you never have to do anything about this. Just always come down and check mark that so that it can make any corrections if it's able to. You can also select to remove chromatic aberrations. Some lenses tend to have more chromatic aberration than others. So you could always just check mark those two as a safety precaution to correct any type of distortions your lens may be causing, or any chromatic aberration that it might have. Then, lastly, lens blur is a really cool effect. You can see in the little example here that you can add blurry background to your photos if you weren't able to capture it at a low enough aperture. This is a super fun tool to play around with. You can change the size of the bokeh to be like a circle, a cat eye, to have rings, to be a bubble, to look like it's anamorphic, all kind of really cool stuff. So be sure to play around with that feature, but don't overdo it. Again, there's a fine line with editing where you can do too much. And it's funny because there's not really a right way to edit, but there is a wrong way. So we've went over everything within this first tab, the edit page of Lightroom. I'll just briefly cover the other pages that you can use, but I'm not going to go in depth because again, this is just an overview of the software. At the top, you have presets. This is where you can use Lightroom presets, your presets that you upload into Lightroom, and presets are so much fun. To me, presets give you a nice starting point to be able to have an already halfway done photo, then you can make small tweaks and you're ready to go. Below the edit page, you have the crop page where you can crop your photo however you need. The remove page is really neat and has a lot of in-depth features that I won't cover, but if this is where you will come if you need to remove an object, clone an object, remove blemishes off of a face. You can remove people from the background of photos, and you'll see here the new distraction removal. I haven't even had a chance to try this yet. It's part of the new update. but you can remove people, you can remove reflections. AI is making this software super cool, and they're just adding on what you can do. So be sure to play around with that. Next up is the masks page. I love using masks. They're super useful to be able to create pools of light in your image. You could use the linear gradient mask to darken the foreground of your image. You can use a radial gradient mask to spotlight like the center of your image if you had something there. And the subject, background, and sky detection works amazing. If you have a picture of a person, you literally just click subject and it will outline that person. You can brighten them, darken them, make any adjustments that you need to of just that person. So definitely learn how to use masks because it can make your photos stand out and give them that little extra depth once you know how to use them and kind of create the darker areas and point the viewer's attention to the subject of the photo. And then of course here you can see the different versions of your photo. If you want to go back to the original or revert the whole thing, you can. Now, real quick, let's just talk about the difference between shooting in JPEG and shooting in RAW. So basically, think about this like making cookies, okay? We're gonna make cookies for a second. We're gonna put all the ingredients together, all of our white balance and our exposure and our aperture and all of the settings that we're using inside the camera. Now, if I'm shooting in JPEG, this is what happens. I put all those ingredients in, and when I take the picture, it bakes that cookie. Boom, finished cookie. But if I'm shooting in RAW, I put all those ingredients, I mix them all together in camera, and when I take the picture, it's just a bowl of mixed ingredients. Now we get to the editing room. With my RAW photo, my ingredients aren't baked yet, so I'm able to really adjust them, change them a whole lot, and then I can bake the final photo. But with my JPEG, the cookie's already been baked. So if I try to adjust it, I can adjust it a little bit. I can change the shape just a little. I can squish it in on the sides, change this a little bit. But if I do too much, the cookie will break or your image will fall apart and you'll be able to tell that you've pushed it too far. So here's an example of this. We know this photo I've been editing is in RAW, so I was really able to change a whole lot of things about the photo. Let's go over to this photo, which is in JPEG, and let's try some extremes just to see how the photo reacts. The biggest way to tell this is like with highlights. So you can see that to a certain degree, if I bring the highlights all the way down, I'm able to recover a lot of how bright this was beforehand. I'm able to bring them back a decent amount, but you can see that there are still some areas that are kind of overexposed completely, and I can't bring back this white spot because I've lost that information because I've baked that into the photo a little too overexposed. So I can bring it back a lot, but not all of the way. Now, for example, if we look at our RAW photo, we could zoom in on these highlights up here. You can see that I can bring those highlights all the way back to where that's not overexposed. You can even tell in the graph that nothing is overexposed. And these photos might not be the perfect example of this. I had to do this real quick and just kind of get some photos together. But you'll notice this in certain photos. If you take them in JPEG and you want to adjust them a whole lot, you'll notice that parts of the image will start to get blocky or grainy, or you won't be able to bring your highlights all the way back, different things like that. So that's just a trade-off of if you shoot with like a film simulation like this and you only want to make minor adjustments, that's fine. But if you need to be able to have complete control over your photo in post, you don't want to worry about your white balance as much, you want to leave more room for error, then you want to shoot in RAW so that you have the most flexibility to adjust all of your colors, bring back your highlights, adjust your shadows, and all of that when you go to edit. Anyway, I want to keep this video simple. I want this to be an overview of the basics, so I'm not going to go in depth into anything else. Let me know in the comments if you want me to make specific videos on how to do certain things in Lightroom. But this was just to give an overview of the software. If you're brand new and just getting into Lightroom, it can be overwhelming what all of the sliders do and where you're supposed to start. Basically start with correcting your photo, stay up in that light area, adjust your photo, come down, adjust your color temperature and your tint. Then you can start to play with your colors and give it more of a stylized look. And honestly, the best way to learn this software is through practice. Just doing it over and over, taking those sliders, going from one extreme to the other, seeing what it does, how it affects your image, and then just get your image to a place that you like it because it really is personal preference. Anyway, if you like this video, be sure to check out some of the other videos on my channel. I have a series on DaVinci Resolve that I'm doing, and I'm going to continue this series on Lightroom, so definitely comment in the comments below if you want to see me do a specific video on a certain topic. Anyway, hope you found some value in this video, and if you did, maybe, I don't know, give it a thumbs up or something.